I'm super curious about a little of your background, how you got involved with the DII, with the Draper Innovation Index in the first place.
Yeah, sure. So Tim reached out to me in 2020, actually. And initially, I'm an economist, so do a lot of data analytics, et cetera. And Tim came to me through somebody who I had worked with previously. And our initial idea was actually to look at colleges and universities and look at entrepreneurship programs and see, what colleges and universities were doing in that space. And Tim has Draper University, which is a tremendous institution to teach entrepreneurship, but in a very different way than traditionally like an academic institution does. So that was our initial idea. We did a little bit of work on that. And then Tim thought, why don't we look globally? He really had the initial idea at what countries are doing and how they rank. So we put that together, got that up and running. And then he said, why don't we do it for the 50 states in the US as well? So we did that about 6 months later. So I think we launched in 2021, and it's been a great partnership. Tim, I love the fact that from the start, he was like, this is good what we're doing, but we need to continue to evolve it over time and make sure that we're not just static, but looking at, various ways of looking at entrepreneurship, investment, et cetera. So that was the genesis of it. And then, so we initially thought of it as an annual kind of a report, but Tim pushed me to say, could we make this more frequent, like on a monthly basis? So we were able to accomplish that. And that's really the DII Global, Draper Innovation Index Global, and the Draper Innovation Index US are really fulfilling Tim's vision of how he sees the world. So we have been very blessed to have the data and the analytics that are able to fulfill his vision.
So it's interesting for me to hear that it started out that Tim kind of wanted to track universities, how they were fueling innovation and entrepreneurship specifically.
Yes. And it turns out, our initial sort of research into it, and that's maybe why we made the pivot. Universities do not do a great job of teaching entrepreneurship. Hopefully in the future that will become more and more a part of what they do. But even business schools like MBA programs don't do a great job of teaching innovation and entrepreneurship.
What do you think the reason for that is?
I think it's a hard work. It's hard work to teach entrepreneurship. And I think universities are, I wouldn't say stuck in the past, but they are stuck with a certain way of viewing the world. And that then bleeds into, what they teach, how they teach, et cetera. And the entrepreneurial mindset, just something that's different than the way academia looks at things. So academia usually wants stuff that's fairly cut and dried. And so entrepreneurship is not that way. It's something that probably more academics should study it. And in fact, when I got my PhD, my dissertation was on this area. At that point, when I was doing my PhD, biotech had, about 25 years of its history because biotech started at a very certain date. And so that's another part of my background that probably allowed me to put the index together is understanding innovation and entrepreneurship, doing interviews with executives at biotech companies, also advanced electronics companies. And that's probably why I didn't go into academia when I graduated, is it's more fun to study the real world. So I think that's probably part of it.
Study the real world. Yeah, it's interesting that education is sometimes slower to adopt new thinking. And also, like you
Yes.
said, it's almost more, dare I say, it's easier or more black and white to teach the certain direction versus entrepreneurship, which is a lot of times creative and free thinking. And so before we dive so deep into the DII, how would you, in maybe simple terms, define what is the Draper Innovation Index?
Yeah. So as I said, it's a monthly report card that ranks countries and states in the US. It grades them on how easy, safe, and profitable it is to start a business, invent something new, or invest in a big idea. And it looks at everything. We put together so much data that goes into the index. It looks at everything from like tax laws and crypto friendliness to personal freedom and venture capital funding. It is really what we built is a very holistic way of looking at the innovation landscape across the world. And I really love what you said about the creativity aspect of this. Creativity and risk taking are two of the highest things that are associated with innovation and entrepreneurship.
Creativity and risk taking are two of the highest things associated with innovation and entrepreneurship. That
That's
is
what we
so
found.
interesting. Wow. And so it was that found through actually the DII, through tracking these global
Yes,
rankings.
absolutely.
Wow.
And they are, we'll get into this probably later, but a lot of the existing studies or rankings that are out there are backward looking. And these are also somewhat predictive as to how countries are going to perform in the future. So that's the other thing we wanted to build into it.
If I'm hearing you correctly, it sounds like other world economic rankings were more looking backwards and the
Yes.
DII is almost looking forwards.
Yes, exactly. It, especially the core metrics that we use in order to do it monthly are things like venture capital momentum. So we built a proprietary algorithm to process that data from PitchBook and look at venture capital momentum across a number of different subject areas. And we found that those trends to be precursors to what actually happens then in the economy.
I know there's a lot of different pieces of the puzzle that the DII is tracking. What are some of the main things that you all are measuring, maybe that potentially have some of the biggest impact on where countries rank or states rank for innovation?
So yeah, the regulatory and tax environment is a big part of our rankings. It just means that low taxes and simpler regulatory environment makes it easier to start, to even think about starting a new business. As I said, venture capital and investments across a number of different investment areas. So money is the fuel that fuels innovation. We track where VC dollars are flowing, and specifically, we do it on an overall basis, but for AI and crypto and blockchain, those are things. Crypto and blockchain themselves, and we have some measurements about how friendly either states or nations are for crypto and blockchain. That indicates openness to new ideas and new financial systems, and with fintech and you know the progress being made on a almost like a daily or weekly basis. Those are really important indicators. They're industries themselves, but they're indicators about that location. New business formation are people actually starting new companies. That's one. And I think probably the most important one, and this is Tim's vision and was his vision from the start, is economic freedom. And his notion is you can't innovate if you aren't free or don't feel free. So he used a number of freedom metrics to gauge personal and economic freedom. And that's a big part of it too, for sure. And probably the most important part is economic freedom.
Economic freedom, personal and economic freedom. Well, thanks for sharing like all these different metrics, right? Of course, like taxes are super important. Where is investments going? And of course, are people actually starting new businesses in these countries and
Yes.
in the States? Along the lines of economic freedom, I believe you all introduced a new measurement tool recently, like that implemented into the DII. Is that right?
Yes, that's right. It was the Cato Institute Human Freedom Index.
Yeah.
It aggregates almost everything that we put into the DII is an aggregation of a bunch of different data. So I think if you really counted up all the data points that are tracked in the indices that then go into the DII, we're talking, over 5,000 data points that are updated on a regular basis. But specifically to the Cato Human Freedom Index, it aggregates 87 different metrics in areas such as rule of law, security and safety, freedom to trade internationally, and sort of civil society. And that's been an especially important thing to add at a time of global political uncertainties, as those kind of individual and collective freedoms impact innovation, entrepreneurship, and overall economic activity in both, I think, the short term and the long term.
Is so interesting to me. Now, it's at least personally, I wouldn't have thought directly like, okay, freedom. How is that impacting entrepreneurship, innovation, growth? Before we started talking, I was thinking about some questions to ask you. I was thinking along these lines. When you think of entrepreneurship, creating new business, growing economies, you obviously think about money and wealth. Now, along the lines of freedom, I'm curious, are you all finding that more freedom, is helping to create more wealth and innovation? Or is it even that more wealth and innovation creates more freedom? Almost like a chicken and the egg type of question for you, Wallace.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I think it's the freedom that comes first. It's the precursor. You can really see that when you think about, especially in the United States and probably Canada and other places where we have people who move here from other countries who have become some of our key innovators over time. Everybody can be an entrepreneur. You might not be a tech entrepreneur, but you can be an entrepreneur in entertainment, or you can be an entrepreneur in, almost anything. People seek out freedom, especially those who have new ideas about how to do something or do something better. The other thing I should probably bring up here that is a core idea that I got from Tim and that we work on together is entrepreneurship and innovation can happen anywhere. You just have to develop the frameworks, regulatory and otherwise, in order to help people flourish. And then entrepreneurship flourishes as well. And his idea is that, traditionally there are certain centers of innovation. Like California has always been known as a place where new ideas happen, and they do. There's no question about that. In the US in general. But his view, and it's really borne out by the data, that is democratizing across the US. California still is a major hub of innovation, but there are so many other places that are also very competitive with California. And in fact, in the rankings are ranked higher than California. And then for the US, there are many countries around the world that are doing amazing, innovative, and entrepreneurial kind of activities. So that democratization is a big part of the DII story as well. That you can be an entrepreneur anywhere, but you want to be in the place that's going to be most supportive to you. And so people move with their feet.
Amen.
If
Yeah,
you're an entrepreneur and the country you're in is not friendly to investment or entrepreneurs, you're going to do your best to get to a country that you think is more supportive and friendly to what you want to do.
I love that insight there, Wallace, right? It's that you can be an entrepreneur anywhere, right? You can be successfully a true entrepreneur building businesses anywhere. But the question is like, where are you going to get supported the most
Yes.
also? It's, dare I say, working sometimes smarter, not harder.
Yes.
Go to the
Right.
place that's going to help you flourish. I also just want to briefly touch on, you said something earlier, and I just want to get some clarity that you're saying anyone can be an entrepreneur. And I think you almost said also that like anyone and everybody should, but I sounded like you were talking more around like the entrepreneurial
It's
mindset.
the mindset. I was just going to use that exact word.
Yeah.
It's a different way of looking at the world. That's something that I think has interested Tim from when he was very young, because he has interacted with so many, entrepreneurs and innovators throughout his life and continues to do so to this day. And he, just by being in the spot that he's in, he saw that mindset. And that's a big part of what Draper University teaches. And it's needs to be taught more and more because, with AI and people really worried about jobs being eliminated and all that, you have to be an entrepreneur. Really, everybody has to be an entrepreneur with their own life. Things are, changing more rapidly than ever before.
Absolutely. Let's take control of our own lives and situations, be innovators. That doesn't mean having to run your own business, start your own thing from scratch,
That's it.
but even
Absolutely.
inside of companies that we work in. So here at BizWorld, that's a huge thing, right? We teach entrepreneurship education. We're teaching life skills through entrepreneurship education, and that is that entrepreneurial thinking.
Yeah.
For people that aren't aware, what's the relationship between the DII and BizWorld? Where did that connection stem from? Tell us just a little bit more about that.
Yeah, initially, this was located at a different nonprofit that Tim had, which is the was the Draper Hero Institute, which did a lot of great things in entrepreneurship. But I think the connection really is that BizWorld teaches the skills that the DII measures. The DII shows where innovation is actually happening and flourishing. And I think BizWorld shows how to make it happen. And by teaching kids, youth, and young adults the basic tenets of that entrepreneurship mindset, we're essentially, I think, seeding a future generation of entrepreneurs who are going to do, things that the world needs. They're going to solve problems that the earth has. They're going to find cures to diseases. They're going to continue the amazing, progress we're making with AI. And I think that's the connection, is that you would hope that, the things that BizWorld teaches will continue. They've already gone global, from their start in California. And I know they're in many countries. It is a way of looking at the world that I think a lot of our youth really, they respond to it. They understand it. I think in some ways, I never thought of this before, but probably everybody is somewhat born as an entrepreneur, and then it gets beaten out of them over time. Um, but that I think that's a youth mindset, is to be entrepreneurial and try to think of things in new ways. So it's a perfect fit with BizWorld's mission and their strategies that they are able to teach people.
Absolutely, absolutely. What an interesting insight, right? That potentially everybody's born as an entrepreneur, born with that entrepreneurial mindset of creative thinking, right?
Yes,
Problem solving, dreaming big. Wallace, you're probably familiar, but this year the theme at BizWorld is dream big and dare to fail. And kids and youth and young adults are the best example of this. And I hear often, like, you never see a baby or a little toddler that thought to themselves, there's no way that I can walk, right? They try and they fail and they learn. And then they try again and they fail and they learn. And they're daring to dream big of, like, I could walk. I've never done it before in my entire life, but I could dream big and walk. And that is really what we're trying to do. And so it's this interesting concept that we're all born with that mindset. And then potentially, society and the world kind of beats it out of us. And a big piece of BizWorld's mission is to help bring that back to the forefront.
absolutely. That creativity is really important. I led a study back in 2018, and that was before generative AI, but you were seeing automation and other forms of AI and robotics happening in workplaces. So we did a national study just in the US of all the jobs that were projected to either increase or decrease. Some Oxford labor market economists had put out an initial kind of rubric about where they thought jobs that would not be nearly as many jobs around, in the next 10 years or so. The things that we found, that we called it being defensible, we called it dimensions of defensibility. The things that really make your skills defensible were very human things, like creativity and being able to work with others and always wanting to explore new ideas. Those were the core things that made you defensible versus other kind of skills that, were far down the list. And I think the generative AI actually makes that more true. We've been thinking about redoing, updating that study, but I think that's the world we live in, is you have to be creative and respond to the changes going on in your world globally, but in just your world that you're living in.
Wow, so interesting. I'm surprised I never heard of this study that you all did that you
Okay.
found. You said it was in 2018 even. That
2018,
it's
yeah.
like the skills to make you defensible against, at that time, robotics, a different type of AI. And now, as you
Yes,
said, even with generative AI, these skills are the durable skills, the life skills that BizWorld is teaching, right?
absolutely.
Teamwork, creativity.
No, yeah. BizWorld is really onto an area that is so much needed, and you just wish it could proliferate, as quickly as possible because that's going to help people deal with a changing world that's just changing more rapidly every day, for sure.
Every day we have to be ready to change with and adapt with it.
Yes.
So pivoting back a little bit to the DII, to the Draper Innovation Index,
Yeah.
I want everybody to be able to use the data. So every month, go see what are the rankings, what's changing. And
Yes.
so, how do you think we can most actionably use the data, right? Go interpret the monthly reports, see the rankings, and use it actionably for all of us.
I think it depends on, whether you're an investor, entrepreneur, kind of a policymaker, I guess. I think like for policymakers, like elected officials, it's to see what policies that particular location is instituting, either move a country up the rankings or down. For entrepreneurs, it's really to decide where to launch your startup. As I said, people can move anywhere pretty much these days and start a company. For investors, it's to identify the next kind of hot markets before they may be obvious. But I think the biggest thing overall for everybody is to show that environments do change. And I think some people think it takes like decades for change to happen, but it can happen just like that. And it can happen on a monthly basis. Big examples that are borne out in the data. Argentina has really risen up the rankings since Milei was elected. He's instituted a lot of things about economic freedom. You know, they had a horrible inflation situation. They had, were very low rated as a country in terms of their credit worthiness or their debt. He's changed all that. And so they've been moving up the rankings. The other thing on the other side was Norway had been one of our highest ranked countries. It had been in the top five. I think at one point it had even gotten up to second or third, and it's fallen down. It's still in the top 20, but they instituted a wealth tax, and that just almost immediately had them drop about 10 places. So it really is all about, what your country or state is doing positively or negatively that then impacts the numbers, quite rapidly. So that's the way it's just that similar to the entrepreneurial mindset. It's understanding that things change and things are changing. They can change, what's the term? Change on a dime or pivot
Yeah.
quite quickly, and those are reflected in the rankings. Another thing that's interesting in working with Tim, as Tim travels a lot, and so usually when he gets back from a trip, he'll email me about his observations about what's going on in particular countries that he's visited. And that's been really interesting to see his views on and then correlate those with what's going on in the rankings. So that's another part that's interesting is actually being on the ground in a country. We have all the data that we have, but actually being on the ground in a country, you really get the sense of, is this a hotspot for new innovation or not? So it's one country that may surprise some people that's really ranked well is Estonia is in the top.
Estonia.
It's a small country, but they're doing some amazing things in AI and blockchain and things like that. Any country, to get back to the democratization thought, any country can rise up the rankings and be a leader. They just have to, it's almost like a garden that, there are some places where you plant seeds and they just flourish. And it's because of the sun and the water and the quality of the soil. And there are other places that, you plant seeds and they just don't do much. And it could be, the soil is rocky or whatever. It doesn't get enough rain or watering. That's at the core, what the DII is about is measuring by country and state your, how have you developed your garden? And then the entrepreneurs are the seeds.
Well, I especially love, I was thinking about it earlier, but I especially love that you mentioned how rapidly on a dime, things change, right? No
Yes.
longer is it that it takes decades for a country or for states in the US to change and be a better climate for innovation and entrepreneurship. It can happen rapidly. It all depends on how much you're tending to these seeds that you plant, how much you're taking care of the entrepreneurs, right, in your
Yeah,
economy and helping them to thrive. I'm
absolutely. It
curious.
really
Let's
is a
let's
leadership issue. I mean, at the end of the day, it's leadership.
a leadership issue.
Yeah. It's
And
understanding. I have a friend who runs the Drucker Institute. Peter Drucker was, the father of modern management theory. And so we have been talking about his ideas more than ever are, you know, really important. It's a lot about the right kind of leadership for sure. Like Malay is an example of a leader who came in and just turned things around. And it's possible anywhere, but you look at a lot of our countries and even states, there's just a little bit of a lack of leadership and leadership that kind of looks down the road and says we have to get to this place. And the one of the biggest things is education. One of the biggest, to the analogy of the garden, one of I don't know if it's the sun or the water, but education is a huge part of the next generation of, plants that are hopefully going to thrive. Education is a huge part of that. And BizWorld obviously has a huge stake in that.
Wallace, I appreciate it. It's so interesting for me to hear more about the DII, about global entrepreneurship, innovation, and even on a state level. So you mentioned that there's three different parties, and we'll wrap up here in just a couple minutes.
Sure.
But you mentioned at least three parties that can really benefit from the DII, right? You said policymakers, entrepreneurs, and investors.
Yes.
And so, touching on this briefly, let's say if you were an investor, okay, you're going to deploy $100 million over the next 1 to 5 years, right? How are you specifically going to use the DII? And maybe if there's already some top of mind, like where would you be looking to invest this money based on the data that's we're seeing?
Yeah, investors, have to diversify. So I don't think I would put it all in one place, but I think I would look at, probably places like Argentina. Uruguay has risen up the rankings, is especially for fintech and blockchain investments. I think that would be a place. I wouldn't ignore like the US or UK or Canada is doing some amazing things, especially government supported investment in AI. So I think I'd spread it around. We mentioned Estonia earlier. That's a small country, but I think I would put some dollars there. And you can just look at the rankings, and it depends on what your focus is. So if it's, AI, there are certain countries that are leaders in that. If it's crypto or blockchain, and those are, as we talked about earlier, important of openness to new ideas and to economic freedom. So that would be the answer. I wouldn't put it all in one place, but I would
It's great.
have maybe some of it in these kind of established leaders like the US, Canada. And then I would place some bets in places like Estonia, Uruguay, Argentina, Singapore.
I love that. I think something important to note that we didn't discuss really is that, the DII is ranking all of these countries, but then you can also see individually inside of the countries or inside of the states, right? All of the different factors and how they rank
Yes,
specifically for crypto, specifically for
yes,
AI, and so many other factors depending on
absolutely.
what you're specifically looking to invest into.
So if you really want to get sophisticated, you could build what they call a suitability model,
Mm.
where you could weight those things yourself. So you could say, if a country is strong in a certain area that you're particularly interested in, that would be a real innovative way to actually use the index. And you could also look at regionally across either in the US or globally. South America right now seems to be a real hotbed, and a lot of South American and Central American countries are rising up. And then there are other countries like China and Russia that have fallen, especially China, both of them, but especially China has fallen quite a bit since we started this. So that's the other part is if you're looking like truly globally, yes, but then you can also within a particular region like South America, you could see within that region, how does Argentina, compare to, say, Brazil, like, or something like that. So that I think there's ways to use it based upon what you're particularly focused on or interested in.
Love that a lot, actually. And then let's end on this. So thinking for entrepreneurs, right? You're an expert data analyst for global innovation, right? If you were now 20 years old, new entrepreneur, where in the world would you go to build your company?
It does depend on the kind of company you think you're going to
Okay,
build.
let's define the company then, maybe. Which sector should we go for?
Maybe not a particular sector, but like,
Hmm.
um, say in if you we're just talking about the US, let's start there.
Okay.
If what's really important to you is that economic freedom or regulatory freedom and crypto support, it'd probably be Wyoming, interestingly enough. And then if you're interested in just an overall pro-business supportive kind of business climate, Florida would probably be the place. And then probably globally, I would say Canada is an interesting place because it's really aggressively funding AI and other kinds of investments in that space. And then Singapore, I think, remains a hub in that part of the world for financial freedom and really supporting entrepreneurs. Of course, the US is always has been at the top since we started this. And the US as a whole is the leader in terms of that. So that's why, we continually attract so many people from around the world who come here. And BizWorld and Tim's operation being located in the Bay Area, in terms of a magnet for people from around the world to come to a place, it doesn't get any better than that. A lot of that is due to the kind of historical venture capital infrastructure that's been built, like Tim's firms and others of his sort of colleagues. That's still world class. So I think a lot of people would say that's number one. But we want to look, as I said, we want to look democratically across the globe. So those were
So,
the earlier ones were thoughts on other places that, somebody should consider. But I will go back, Wayne,
hmm,
to say entrepreneurs can happen anywhere. If you're, in fact, in a place that wasn't one of those that I just mentioned, you can make it happen. You can make it happen for sure.
well, thank you so much. I appreciate it. Thanks for sharing about the Draper Innovation Index, giving your thoughts on global
Pleasure.
innovation and entrepreneurship. I always like to wrap up just in a broad question. If there's anything that I didn't ask that I maybe should have, any thoughts on innovation, the DII, or even Biz World that you want to leave us with?
Yeah, we probably didn't talk about BizWorld enough. Having come to understand what they're doing there and having gone, they have an annual lunch. I think it's in December usually. I've gone to a couple of those and they invite students to come there. So the lunch starts at like, I think the doors open. It's at the Computer History Museum or
Yep.
Museum of
Yep.
Computer
The
History.
annual Risk Master Luncheon. Right.
Yeah.
So, mhm.
And so students, they select teams of students who develop products, and then you get like monopoly money, and you can choose which of the products to buy. And then the results are, announced later. But to have students, these are youth who are like 10, 11, 12 years old, come up to you and say, hey, we have this great product. Just the buzz of that experience is amazing. Then, you get to hear from Tim and others about their experience in actually investing in that world. BizWorld pulls all that together, a really, I think, valuable asset that more people should know about and more countries and states should implement what BizWorld does. I think we talked about it some, but I just want to emphasize that this world is really onto something that's increasingly important for countries and states and for individuals, most importantly for individuals. And that mindset, and you can see the mindset in these 10-year-olds and 11-year-olds and 12-year-olds, it's different than your normal interaction with a 10, 11, or 12-year-old. It's very different in a very positive way.
Lots of way. Thanks
Yeah.
so much for sharing that. It's pretty unbelievable, right? How
Yes.
kids and youth so young can be molded in such an amazing way to think differently and really just dream big.
I think it's in there. It's in their brains. It's just having the strategies and techniques to bring it out. And that's what BizWorld does, is to bring that out. That I think it's innate in everybody, really. And BizWorld is just in the business of, you know, bringing that out and then growing that.
Well, thank you so much. It's greatly, greatly appreciated.
Oh, thank you so much, Wayne. Appreciate it.